Okay, good morning, everybody. It's a roundtable for water journalists, and I asked myself, am I a water journalist? Being qua being, being for the sake of being, water for the sake of water. Are we looking at that? And I found that there is an extremely anthropocentric lens that we put on water, which is its usage, its pollution, its how is it looking, the color, but water for the sake of water. And I think it ties neatly with a question which was raised yesterday of Sainath that is river a living entity? So I found that we are always talking about availability when the problem is actually access. When monsoon was, for so many months and it is short and it is deficit, then we'll talk about, oh, today water will be available in your taps for so many hours, please fill up your buckets. Then we'll talk about availability in terms of, are people getting it, rich, poor, whatever. Well, the problem really is access. And that ties in again with issues of equity and not equality, because equality assumes everybody is equal. I thought it would be interesting to also talk about, can water have rights? This has actually been done by the New Zealand government for the Maori tribe, but the Wanganao River, which was revered by the Maori people, was declared a living entity with full legal rights. I mean, they've done it in New Zealand, but in our country where, there are huge populations that live off that water, and again, have access issues, what will be the implication in terms of recognizing it as a legal entity? A cascade of dams that were planned on the river Ganga. And this is something we miss, which is when I'm talking about access, we trekked up to a village, and a lady there, I met a lady who was just sitting in a hut which had cracks on it, and I said, what happened? And she said, well, they're blasting rocks all day and there are cracks in my house. And she said that she just the month before had lost her grandfather, and because in the hydropower dams they decide when the water will be released into the river at that time was bone dry. There was no water in it, so she had to ask the power company to release water so she could perform the last rites for her grandfather. So even the rituals which revolve around water are no longer available, and a local person who's living right next to the river, who's had 4 generations, 5 generations, or millennia since when they have resided there, now find that they can't perform the last rites because the power company will decide when the water will be released and when the Ganga becomes the Ganga. When it comes to biodiversity and water, we have the data, we know we're a mega biodiverse rich nation, and we occupy the 9th position in terms of freshwater mega biodiversity. We talk about threats for sure. We're good at that as journalists. We talk about overexploitation, pollution, flow modification is a big one now with all the dams coming up. What we don't talk about. Freshwater ecosystems are today the most endangered ecosystems in the world. Between 1997 and 2001, only 7% of the papers in the leading journal in the field of conservation biology were concerned with freshwater species. What we call the small and artisanal fishermen and women. And she said that the water that is released from the aquaculture farms, that then goes into the sea and it kills the fish. And she found that she was not being able to earn a livelihood. So within the community, there was then a tussle going on between the aquaculture farm owners, or I would say the people who had leased their land out for these aquaculture clusters, and this lady who could not go out with her husband and fish. Where was she supposed to go? So I think also this notion of community, when we say community, it's not homogeneous. Within the community itself, there are power structures, issues of equity, as I said, there was issues of air pollution. It was related to these aquaculture clusters, which again, we were dealing with issues of land because they had been leased by the landowners to the farming community there. Who used to once till the lands but found that this is perhaps more profitable, and then the tussle with the fishermen there. So a bunch of things all sort of came into one story. How the coastline had changed because of the number of aquaculture farms that had come up, some of them illegal. This is happening right now. This crisis is playing out right now. Sambar Lake in Rajasthan, 8,000 birds died in 2019. We don't know how. We don't know why. Water cannot be seen as an anthropocentric entity or just a resource. How do we move beyond that? More research for documenting species in freshwater ecosystems. Closer home, where we are. Development projects every 20 kilometers along the Konkan coast. What's that going to do to the water? Thermal power plants, sending that water out back into the sea. Power plants, ports, all that is coming up. Again, we know how precious the Konkan coast is. And this seems like a lighter note, but it's actually the more dreary part of, we report on species and things dying. Are we dying out as a species? But there are some societies, there are some small examples, and I found this on the Urban Water website, which is run, I think, by the Wipro Foundation. And they have documented examples from Pune as well. Societies that have taken charge and said, okay, we're not going to depend on the tanker system. We're going to do our own. So in the built environment, what are the things that you can do to reduce your water consumption? So this is a society which has reduced its water consumption by 50%, simply by rainwater harvesting, simply by design, by installing the right infrastructure in place, and actually reducing their water footprint. So how do we make this as mandatory for all buildings? Why should these be one-offs? And I know we have the green rating building system, but there are problems with that. So until we significantly reduce our water footprint by taking the examples of, say, housing societies, or all cities perhaps should have this as mandatory. How do we make that happen? Those are, I think, the good stories perhaps that we could tell.